What if the answer to one of America's most haunting mysteries was hiding in plain sight, in a quiet neighborhood, behind the front door of an ordinary house? For nearly 2 decades, the shores of Long Island have carried a secret, whispered through the tall beach grass, carried by the Atlantic wind, and buried beneath shifting sands. This is Gilgo Beach, a narrow stretch of coastline just off Ocean Parkway, peaceful by day, eerily isolated by night. But behind this calm exterior, a much darker story was taking shape, one that would challenge law enforcement and linger in the American consciousness for years. For countless families, it began with the disappearance of someone they loved. For investigators, it began with a single search operation. The origins of this mystery stretch even earlier, into a pattern of missing persons cases dating back to the early 2000s. In December 2010, during a search for a missing woman named Shannon Gilbert, police officers walked along the brush line near Gilgo Beach and stumbled onto something entirely unexpected. It wasn't Shannon. It was the remains of a different young woman. Then more, and more. For victims, all found within days of each other, all located along the same remote stretch of highway. This cluster of discoveries would soon be known across the nation as the Gilgo Four. Their identities, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello, became the foundation of one of the most complex criminal investigations in modern New York history. The pattern was too sharp to ignore, too intentional to be coincidence, too chilling to dismiss. The silence of Gilgo Beach was shattered. A single question echoed across Suffolk County. Is there a serial killer on Long Island? Most of the victims at Gilgo Beach shared similar backgrounds. They were young. They were women. Many were sex workers, navigating dangerous environments with few safety nets. They had families, parents, siblings, children, who searched for them, waited for them, and hoped for answers that never came. Each missing person report carried details, names, photos, last seen locations, and for years those details gathered dust inside filing cabinets and computer servers. There was no single agency tracking all the cases together. No unified theory, no clear suspect, just isolated stories of vanished women. Gilgo Beach is a study in contrast. In summer, it's serene, with fishing boats gliding over still waters and families barbecuing near the dunes. But in the off-season, the beach transforms. The air turns cold, the wind grows sharp, and the long stretch of Ocean Parkway becomes almost completely deserted. This isolation is what made the discoveries so shocking. This was an open, exposed place, yet rarely watched. A place where a car could pull over at night without another soul noticing. After the initial discoveries in 2010 and early 2011, the investigation exploded. Police combed through miles of coastline. Additional remains were found. New theories emerged. But despite the scale of the search, the case soon entered a fog of uncertainty. Multiple victims, no confirmed suspect, evidence collected, no clear DNA link. Detectives came and went. Task forces formed and dissolved. Public pressure surged and faded. Year after year, Gilgo Beach remained a mystery. For more than a decade, it seemed the person responsible had simply disappeared, just as invisible as the victims had once been. Then, in 2022, everything changed. A new team of investigators reopened the case from scratch. They brought advanced forensic technologies, digital analysis experts, and a willingness to question old assumptions. They began comparing data from thousands of pages of records, old phone logs, archived interviews, historical cell tower information, autopsy reports, digital footprints. And slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Clues once thought insignificant began aligning. Timelines once dismissed began to matter. And a geographical pattern centered on one location began to stand out. A name began appearing in multiple spreadsheets, maps, and reconstructions. In July 2023, after months of covert surveillance, investigators moved in. The name they revealed stunned the entire country: Rex Andrew Heuermann, a married father, a suburban homeowner in Massapequa Park, a professional architect with an office in Manhattan's financial district. To colleagues, he was described as serious, private, methodical. To neighbors, he was quiet and unremarkable. His home, an ordinary-looking house with peeling paint and cluttered yard, sat just minutes from the area where several victims were discovered. His background revealed no major crimes, no history of violence, no alarming records, and yet, prosecutors believed he might be one of the most elusive serial killers in the United States. Before the world ever heard his name, the case had become a symbol of unanswered questions, whose remains were still unidentified. How many victims were connected? When the arrest was announced in 2023, it was as if the story that had once faded from national attention suddenly roared back to the forefront. For the first time in years, the case had a face. But the most chilling realization was this. If the allegations are true, one of the most notorious killers lived not in shadows, but in a regular neighborhood. A man whose daily routine took him past neighbors, shop owners, commuters, and co-workers, unnoticed. A man who blended in so well that it took nearly 13 years for the investigation to circle back to him. In the heart of Long Island, beneath the ordinary rhythms of suburban life, a mystery was waiting to be uncovered. And in 2023, the silence finally broke.
To understand how investigators reached the breakthrough of 2023, we must go back to where it all began. A single night in May 2010 and a desperate call for help. On the early morning of May 1st, 2010, 24-year-old Shannon Gilbert, an escort, visited a client in the gated community of Oak Beach near Gilgo Beach. At approximately 4:51 a.m., she made a frantic 911 call that lasted more than 20 minutes, sounding terrified and disoriented, saying someone was after her and she needed help. Shannon ran from house to house, knocking on doors, seeking safety, but vanished into the marshland before police arrived. Hours turned into days, then weeks, with no sign of her, sparking a local search that yielded nothing substantial. Authorities initially believed her disappearance was isolated, not realizing her case would uncover one of New York's largest crime scenes. 7 months later, in December 2010, Suffolk County Police returned to search for Shannon, combing the thick brush and dunes near Ocean Parkway. Instead of finding Shannon, they made a discovery that would forever change the investigation. One set of remains, then a second, a third, and a fourth. These 4 victims, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthélemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello, had vanished years apart, but ended up in the same isolated location. The discovery of the Gilgo 4 created instant national headlines, with the FBI joining local police and news vans lining the highway. For the first time, Long Island residents confronted a terrifying possibility. A serial killer might be operating among them. As police expanded their search zone in early 2011, more remains were discovered, spanning miles along Ocean Parkway. These discoveries included different victims, different timelines, and different conditions, some linked to disappearances from years earlier. A few had no confirmed connection to the Gilgo 4, suggesting the possibility of more than one perpetrator or a single individual operating over many years. In total, authorities eventually uncovered multiple victims in and around the Gilgo Beach area, making the scale of the crime scene unprecedented. National media outlets like CNN, ABC, and NBC reported daily updates, making the Gilgo Beach case front-page news. In the years following the discoveries, Suffolk County Police and the FBI conducted one of New York's most extensive investigations. They analyzed phone records, cell tower pings, witness interviews, financial histories, and known offender profiles. The public followed every development, and families of missing women campaigned for answers, while officials held press conferences. But behind the scenes, progress was slow, with victims from different states and cities and evidence weathered by time and environment. Police faced anonymous phone calls, burner phones that left no trail, conflicting witness accounts, and jurisdiction overlaps. Every possible lead created 2 more questions, and through it all, the suspect remained unidentified. By the mid-2010s, frustration spread, with criticisms about the handling of Shannon Gilbert's disappearance and early leads. There were disputes about which agencies should lead the case, and family members expressed pain and anger during vigils. The FBI briefly withdrew, then re-engaged under new leadership, but public trust eroded and hope began to fade. Though detectives continued working, the case seemed stuck, buried under years of conflicting evidence and unresolved timelines. In early 2020, a new Suffolk County Police Commissioner promised renewed transparency and commitment to solving the case. Investigators revisited old case files, early witness accounts, crime scene photos, and digital records from 2010 onward. They remapped timelines using modern tools and updated DNA methods unavailable a decade earlier. A new task force was built with county, state, and federal agencies fully cooperating, slowly and quietly building momentum. Sometimes the difference between a cold case and a breakthrough is not more evidence, but new eyes. In early 2022, a dedicated Gilgo Beach homicide task force was formally established, including Suffolk County Police, the FBI, and New York State Police. Their job was simple in concept, but massive in scale. Start from the beginning, rebuild everything, and leave nothing untouched. They applied modern cell phone analysis, behavioral profiling, advanced forensic comparisons, and new DNA techniques. As they compared data across systems, patterns began to emerge. Phone calls linked multiple victims, travel patterns overlapped, and geographic clusters pointed to a central zone of activity. By late 2022, the task force had built enough overlap and connected threads to focus on one individual. A name that had appeared quietly in earlier records, a name no one expected to become central to the case. The timeline of the Gilgo Beach murders spanned over a decade, an enormous patchwork of missing persons reports, anonymous calls, and unanswered questions. For years, the case seemed impossible to solve, but by 2022, after countless hours of analysis and reinvestigation, the pieces finally began to align. The cold case was thawing, the shadows were shrinking, and the name investigators isolated would soon shock the world. The mystery that began with a single 911 call was on the verge of a new chapter, and the Long Island serial killer investigation was about to change forever. By 2022, the Gilgo Beach case remained a haunting, unanswered question over Long Island, frustrating investigators and families for over a decade. But something was about to change. A new team formed with a fresh determination to solve this complex mystery. In early 2022, Suffolk County officials announced the creation of the Gilgo Beach Homicide Task Force. This unprecedented partnership brought fresh eyes and modern forensic tools to a case that had long frustrated investigators. The task force united the Suffolk County Police Department, New York State Police, and the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office. Federal agencies, including the FBI, criminal analysts, forensic specialists, and digital investigators, also joined this swarm of expertise. Their mission was clear: rebuild the investigation from the ground up, tackling one of New York's most complex cases. Detectives began by sifting through thousands of pages of old reports, hundreds of witness interviews, and years of phone records. They also examined dormant forensic samples, crime scene photographs, maps, and timelines, treating the case like a massive puzzle. Crucially, they now had advanced tools unavailable in 2010 and 2011, including advanced DNA analysis and updated cell site mapping. Digital forensics and modern data tracking algorithms allowed them to combine fragments that once seemed unconnected piece by piece. One pattern immediately stood out: a series of burner phones used to contact multiple victims before they vanished. These phones, purchased anonymously and discarded after brief use, created confusion in 2010, but now formed a crucial trail. Modern analysis revealed these burner phones repeatedly pinged near Massapequa Park, a quiet suburban neighborhood in Nassau County. This consistent pattern wasn't random. It led the task force to mark a small circle on their digital map over a residential block. Inside that circle were dozens of homes, one of which would belong to a suspect, though they didn't know which one yet. The team revisited statements concerning Amber Costello, one of the 4 victims found in December 2010. A witness from Amber's disappearance had described seeing a man in a distinctive pickup truck, information that was noted but led nowhere at the time. In 2022, investigators ran the vehicle description against historical DMV data, and this time, the data hit. A truck matching the description appeared in records tied to a Massapequa Park address, and a name surfaced. However, the task force wasn't ready to act. They needed far more than just a matching truck. Investigators began discreet, long-term surveillance on the individual connected to that address. observing movements, routines, and habits. They learned the suspect worked as an architect in Manhattan, commuting daily, a middle-aged man with a stable career, a homeowner, and a father. He looked like anyone else, but investigators watched closely, waiting for a mistake. The break came unexpectedly during surveillance in New York City, when the man finished a slice of pizza and tossed the crust into a public trash can. The task force retrieved the pizza crust carefully, legally, and discreetly, sending it straight to the lab. Inside that crust was DNA, which, after over a decade, modern testing revealed matched DNA tied to hairs found on materials linked to some victims. This familial match pointed directly to a household member, and the evidence pointed back to one name, Rex Andrew Heuermann. With DNA linking Heuermann to the case, investigators delved into his online life, uncovering extensive searches related to victims and the Gilgo Beach investigation. They found maps, relevant locations, and accounts created using false identities, revealing patterns of online activities spanning years. These findings deepened suspicions, confirming this wasn't random but methodical, organized, and calculated. Witness statements, phone data, vehicle records, DNA evidence, and digital footprints all converged. Piece by piece, the impossible puzzle began to reveal a clear, unmistakable picture. By mid-2023, the task force believed they knew the truth and who they believed was responsible. After months of surveillance, reviewing evidence, and countless meetings, the team finally decided they had enough. It was time to move. For more than a decade, the Gilgo Beach investigation focused on the unknown, a faceless figure, a shadow moving between two worlds. But now, the investigation finally had a name: Rex Andrew Heuermann, a man who, until 2023, lived his life unnoticed by the world. Investigators believe that beneath this ordinary exterior existed a far darker reality. Rex Heuermann was born and raised on Long Island, in a quiet neighborhood of Massapequa Park, a place defined by manicured lawns and tree-lined streets. His childhood home, a modest structure, would later become a focal point in the investigation, not because anyone suspected what was inside, but because of how completely unremarkable it seemed. Neighbors remembered him as quiet, a man who kept to himself, someone who didn't seek attention. Nothing about him stood out, nothing about him screamed danger, and that, investigators would later say, might have been the most disturbing part of all. By adulthood, Heuermann had built a career as an architect in Manhattan, one of the busiest, most demanding professional environments in the country. He worked in the heart of the city, surrounded by skyscrapers, construction deadlines, and high-stakes clients. He presented himself as disciplined, organized, meticulous, traits valued in architecture. On paper, he was a professional living a steady, predictable life, commuting from Long Island to Manhattan, working long hours, returning home to a family. But the task force would eventually question whether that predictability was a facade, masking something else. Heuermann was married. He had children. He lived in the same family home for decades. To the outside world, he appeared settled and stable. But as investigators began peeling back the layers of his life, they uncovered discrepancies. Phone records, travel patterns, digital behavior, all suggested he might have been living a second life, hidden behind curtains, locked devices, and anonymous technology. The most revealing clues weren't in his personal relationships or his professional background, but in his digital habits. Investigators found a pattern of burner phones used to contact several victims, and calls made near areas connected to disappearances. Online profiles created under different identities, and searches linked to the investigation, described as concerning and extensive. Maps and location data tied to key areas. These weren't coincidences. They were patterns that became impossible to ignore. The digital evidence didn't just point toward planning. It suggested ongoing behavior across multiple years. Despite the mountain of evidence, one question remains the most difficult to answer. Why? What would drive someone to do what prosecutors allege Heuermann did? There is no confession, no direct explanation. Prosecutors outline a portrait of a man leading two very different lives: a hardworking architect, provider, co-worker, neighbor, family man. The other, a person engaged in secretive behavior investigators claim aligns with the disappearances of multiple women. The motive, they suggest, may lie in that divide, a dual existence, carefully compartmentalized, hidden behind normalcy. Detectives believe his organizational skills, so valued in his architecture career, may have also played a role in his secret life, methodical, structured, calculating. These traits, they argue, appear throughout the timeline of the victims. Investigators eventually connected Heuermann to travel patterns matching key dates, phone usage aligning with victims' last known communications, and geographic familiarity with the remote area near Gilgo Beach. A vehicle description from a witness that matched his historical records, and hair samples and DNA evidence recovered through modern testing. Every piece of evidence alone might not have been enough, but together, they formed a picture investigators believed they could no longer ignore. Heuermann's habits, his commute, his local ties, his long residency on Long Island, his access to the area where victims were found. The task force concluded these factors placed him at the center of a timeline stretching over many years. As detectives assembled more data, the alleged shadow behind the Gilgo Beach mystery, once faceless, began to sharpen into a human outline. A man still living in the same neighborhood, still working in the city, still walking the same streets he had walked for decades. To investigators, the double life theory wasn't just speculation. It was the simplest explanation for how the case had stayed unsolved for so long. How someone could blend in so perfectly. How someone could remain unnoticed while living so close to the area at the heart of the investigation. Over time, the task force became convinced. The key to the mystery was not a stranger passing through, but someone hiding in plain sight. And in their eyes, that someone was Rex Andrew Heuermann. By 2023, prosecutors and investigators share the same conclusion. They believe they know the suspect. They believe they understand his patterns. They believe the evidence, digital, physical, and circumstantial, points to him. The mystery that once seemed unsolvable finally has a shape, a name, a face. And soon, the world will learn it, because the next step in this story is the moment everything becomes public, the arrest.
July 13th, 2023 marks a pivotal moment in the Gilgo Beach investigation as years of unanswered questions and forensic review culminate in a decisive action. The world was about to witness the moment a decade-long mystery finally began to unravel. On a warm Thursday evening in Manhattan, people on Fifth Avenue went about their day, unaware of the critical operation unfolding around them. Hidden within the crowd, members of the Gilgo Beach Task Force were watching one man, Rex Andrew Heuermann, whom they had followed for months. Heuermann exited his workplace and walked toward his vehicle, an ordinary moment that was about to change everything. Authorities moved in with calm, practiced precision, and the arrest was over in seconds, without chaos or resistance. News quickly spread across Manhattan. A suspect in the Gilgo Beach killings had been captured. Back in Massapequa Park, Heuermann's quiet neighborhood erupted into a media storm, with news vans and helicopters converging. Neighbors stood stunned, grappling with the disbelief and fear that a man linked to major unsolved crimes had lived among them. Heuermann's family was thrown into sudden turmoil, having no warning or expectation of the investigation surrounding him. Within hours, the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office announced multiple counts of first- and second-degree murder. These charges were linked to Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello, with Maureen Brainerd Barnes added shortly after. As forensic reviews continued, additional charges connected to other victims, including Jessica Taylor, Sandra Costilla, and Valerie Mack, expanded the legal picture. Prosecutors described Heuermann as the main suspect in one of the most significant serial investigations in modern New York history. Heuermann's first court appearance drew national attention, with the courtroom packed with journalists, investigators, and victims' families. He pleaded not guilty to all charges and was held without bail, reflecting the severity and massive scope of the allegations. The courtroom became a center of national attention, with every hearing drawing reporters and experts speculating on evidence and legal strategies. Heuermann's defense team responded aggressively, challenging surveillance methods, digital data interpretation, and DNA handling. They argued that newer forensic methods must be examined with caution and insisted that Heuermann maintains his innocence. Prosecutors countered with strong statements, laying out a detailed timeline constructed from years of data. Their evidence included cell tower records, burner phone patterns, surveillance observations, vehicle records, and DNA results. Advanced DNA testing, a key component, linked Heuermann to 6 of the 7 victims and was ruled admissible in a New York court for the first time. They argued that the evidence forms a consistent pattern, pointing to a single individual, and expressed confidence it would hold up in court. As the case progresses, new revelations continue to surface, with investigators revisiting older remains and applying modern testing. Each new discovery leads to hearings, motions, and more legal maneuvering, making it clear that this case is constantly evolving. Legal analysts predict a full trial will be long, complex, and heavily scrutinized, with over 100 witnesses expected. As of November 2025, there is no verdict or final outcome. The case remains active, unfolding in labs, courtrooms, and prosecutors' offices. Every development in this case is broadcast across the nation, with every hearing becoming a headline and every new piece of evidence sparking discussion. The arrest marked a turning point, but not an ending. The legal process is far from over. Families of the victims continue to wait for resolution, and investigators continue their search, knowing the answers may still be incomplete. The story of the Gilgo Beach murders is an active legal battle, a forensic quest, and a pursuit of justice still in motion. The final chapter has not yet been written.
The arrest of Rex Heuermann sent shockwaves through Long Island, but it didn't close the book on the Gilgo Beach case. Instead, it opened new chapters filled with uncertainty and unanswered questions that still haunt the investigation.
In the days following the arrest, Long Island residents were caught between disbelief and relief. Many had believed the case would never be solved, and the image of the killer as an ordinary architect, husband, and father challenged their assumptions.
The arrest brought hope, but for many families, it wasn't closure, as answers remain painfully incomplete. Several victims along Ocean Parkway still have not been identified, and families await DNA breakthroughs. The victims' families and the public still wonder, are all the victims connected? Did the killer operate alone? And how many lives were truly affected by these tragic events? Heuermann's arrest accelerated the investigation, with detectives revisiting evidence stored for over a decade. Cold leads were warmed up, old interviews re-examined, and forensic teams used advanced DNA technologies. As investigators peeled back layers of the past, new questions emerged. Some evidence didn't align neatly with the timeline, and victims' remains were found miles apart, complicating the narrative. One of the biggest and most unsettling questions is whether there are more victims. The dense brushland along the highway, difficult to search fully, may still hold secrets. Some investigators believe the area may hold more secrets, while others speculate that additional victims might be far from Gilgo Beach, leaving families without answers. Another critical question is whether the killer worked alone. While Heuermann is central, the scale and complexity of some evidence leave room for speculation about accomplices. Experts debate if a single person could be responsible for all acts connected to the multiple sets of remains. Some criminologists suggest the area may have attracted more than one offender. The case also exposed the fragility of early forensic technology. When the first remains were found in 2010, many modern tools simply didn't exist, slowing progress. Combined with overlapping jurisdictions and massive search areas, the investigation faced significant challenges. Key evidence degraded, and leads grew cold until 2022. A renewed task force and modern technology finally connected the dots, leading to Heuermann's arrest. Advances in DNA technology, like analyzing rootless hairs, were pivotal. The Gilgo Beach case highlighted a crucial issue. Many victims came from marginalized or vulnerable communities. Some struggled with economic hardship or worked in dangerous environments. Many families felt their missing loved ones didn't get immediate attention, sparking national conversations about how society views missing persons, especially women whose voices are often overlooked. Today, the investigation continues behind the scenes. Evidence is still being processed, old phone records remapped, and new charges have been added as the case moves through court. A full trial is expected, but no final verdict has been reached. The story is still being written in court filings, lab results, and detective interviews. On the quiet shores of Gilgo Beach, the waves still wash across the sand, but the truth beneath them has yet to be fully uncovered. And until it is, the mystery continues.
Every story we tell on screen ends with credits, with a fade to black and the hum of silence. Real life rarely does. Real life keeps asking questions. We began this series with a name that haunted investigators for years, a shoreline full of unanswered calls, missing faces, and families who refused to stop searching. We traveled through timelines and lab reports, watching detectives comb brush and databases, tracing a trail that led, slowly, painstakingly, to an ordinary house on a suburban street. This final chapter is not an epilogue of closure. It is a call to remember, to reflect, and to act. Behind each forensic sample, behind each line in a police report, was a person. Mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, friends who laughed and worried and loved. Each name deserves more than a footnote in a criminal file. Each family deserves the truth and the dignity of remembrance. We close this chapter not to celebrate the arrest or to presume finality, but to honor those who were lost and those who continue to seek answers. Their lives, ordinary and extraordinary, are the measure of why we investigate, why we question, why we never stop. Arrest is a moment. Justice is a process. It is deliberate by design, meant to balance the search for truth with the protections our legal system requires. Trials take time. Evidence must be examined, defended, and tested under light and scrutiny. That can feel frustrating to families and communities eager for answers. Yet it is also how the system aims to ensure that verdicts are sound and accountability is real. So we wait for the court to do its work. We watch the proceedings, read the filings, and listen to expert testimony. We demand transparency and fairness in equal measure. The Gilgo Beach investigation holds lessons beyond a single arrest. It reminds us that technology evolves. What we couldn't test a decade ago can become crucial evidence today. It reveals the importance of coordinated agencies working without jurisdictional blind spots. It highlights how subtle patterns can converge into a solvable case. And it underscores a harder truth. Those who are vulnerable often remain invisible to institutions that should protect them. The work of changing that begins with policy, outreach, and society's willingness to listen. Public interest fuels investigations, but it also shapes narratives. Media coverage can rally resources and pressure authorities to act, but it can also amplify conjecture, misinterpretation, and harm. As viewers, we carry responsibility to demand careful, verified reporting, to respect the privacy of families, and to resist the rush to judgment. True investigative journalism aims to illuminate facts, not fan flames. Healing happens in communities. It is quiet and imperfect. It starts with listening to those who were left behind and supporting them in practical ways. This includes DNA testing initiatives, cold case review units, victim advocacy programs, and better systems for reporting and tracking disappearances. If you are watching and you want to help, consider supporting organizations focused on missing persons, victims' rights, and forensic advances. Donate if you can. Volunteer if you're able. Educate yourself and others. Despite progress, many questions remain. Which remains belong to which missing person? Were there others whose disappearances never made headlines? Did the events connected to Gilgo Beach involve more than one person? How many truths are still buried beneath brush and time? Those are not rhetorical questions. They are active investigations. They demand resources, renewed attention, and public impatience for answers that can't be forced but must be pursued relentlessly. If this episode, left you unsettled, that response is exactly why stories like this matter. They force us to reckon with difficult truths about safety, attention, and the work required to bring justice to light. If you found this case compelling and want to follow more real investigations, courtroom moments, and true crime breakdowns, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Your likes, comments, and turning on the notification bell help you stay updated whenever we release a new story. Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you plan to comment or discuss this case, please keep in mind, be respectful to victims' families and avoid speculation that could cause harm. Cite credible sources when sharing developments, official statements, court documents, reputable outlets. If you have credible information related to a missing person, Contact law enforcement rather than posting unverified claims online. If this story affects you personally, seek support. Hotlines and local advocacy groups can help. The shore keeps its secrets for a time, but secrets have a way of meeting the light. We will keep watching, asking, and reporting because answers matter. Until next time, take care of each other.